Quindi buonasera a tutti e grazie di essere intervenuti a questo nuovo incontro dei giovedì di EIT. Io sono Paolo Ravazzani, sono il direttore dell'Istituto di Elettronica e di Ingegneria dell'Informazione e delle Telecomunicazioni del Consiglio Nazionale delle Ricerche, in breve IEIT CNR. Quest'oggi discuteremo di un argomento che credo sia veramente importante in questo periodo per tutti: come comunicare la scienza. E abbiamo invitato Peter Wiedemann, esperto di comunicazione scientifica a tutti i livelli, che ringrazio e a cui fra poco darò la parola. Concludo semplicemente, come sempre, ricordando che l'evento è registrato e verrà poi reso pubblico su YouTube. Just to repeat in English for Peter, but I think that Peter, you already know that we are recording these events, and after that we will publish it on the YouTube channel of the Institute. We have in YouTube channel. And is a sort of communication. And I'm stopping here, and I give a platform to Peter Wiedemann, Professor Peter Wiedemann, and thank you to Peter to be here this evening.
Paolo, thank you very much for your nice introduction, and it's a pleasure for me to be remote connected to you. I mean, I would prefer to be in Milano, of course, but the situation doesn't allow it. So I will start with my talk soon. Let me do that. Now, so it's you see the screen. Oh, wonderful. Perfect. So let me start. The title of my talk today is Science Communication Under Siege. And of course, I would like to say what we can do about that. What are the possible remedies? And that is an overview of what I'm going to present. The starting point is a small thought experiment, we two together. And then I would like to go to the straight direct to the crucial issues and challenges of science communication. I would do that, and I like to do that with a few examples of science communication, of, let's say, twisted or sometimes problematic science communication. And I will focus on what we can learn from these examples. And of course, I will summarize it a little bit in terms of what are the open issues, what are the critical issues, what are the lessons learned, and then we have this nice question-answer session. So let me start with the thought experiment. I mean, very common slogan is saying is we all need science for making effective decisions in our lives. You see, that is kind of message. You see that? Yeah. And a thought experiment I would like to do with you now is imagine that you sit in your cafeteria, nobody is there, and the cash register is open. So the question is, would you take some money from the open cash register in your cafeteria? Yes or no? And I would say that most of the people would say, no, I would do that. That's not a good thing to do that. And they would also say that they don't need any scientific advice because the decision is quite clear. Don't take it. But if you ask science, and in this case, economists.
Sorry, Peter.
Yeah.
Now we can see only you, but not your presentation. Probably you interrupted the sharing.
No, that is, I can't just see my transparency is nothing else. No picture of all. I'll try it again. So let me have. This is screen. I do it again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
There's no problem. So we go to that one.
Okay.
Now you see that?
Yes. And
now that is showed experiment.
perfect. Perfect.
Just
Thank you very much.
Take some money. Do you take some money or not? And question was, do you need scientific advice for your decision? And obviously, most people don't need any scientific advice. But if there is one, at least from economists, and you see that these economists is Jerry Becker, and he got the Nobel Prize in 1992, and he would say, well, there are three questions on. So first of all is how much money is in the cash register. The second question is how likely is it to get caught, and what would be the penalty if you get caught? So you have to look at the benefits on the one side and on the risk on the other side. And if the benefits outweigh the risks, then of course you should take the money. But you see, that little thought experiment should made it clear that most decisions in everyday life are not based on scientific evidence. They are based on habits or moral considerations. But nevertheless, science plays a crucial role in media discourse in politics today. There is no doubt about it. And the question is again, why? And it is quite simple to explain that in cases where our everyday experiences are not sufficient for understanding an issue and for making appropriate decisions, science is needed. So science comes then into the game. So one example is, for instance, how many fatalities are caused by COVID-19 in Italy. That is something which, an information which can only be provided by epidemiologists, that means by science. Or another question, are pesticides in mother's milk dangerous? Or another one, is sunbathing a serious health risk to people? So that are examples of questions where we need science. Or the next one is, or the last one is, should women over 50 participate in breast cancer screening? So we need science to give good answers to these kind of questions. But what are the challenges, and what are the crucial issues we have to take into account here? And of course, I would start with, let's say, what I call shared beliefs in our society. And there is, I guess, a strong belief that science can provide high quality, or provides high quality evidence. And that means indisputable facts and clear-cut conclusions like 1 and 2 is 3. So that are shared beliefs. However, it is not that simple. You see, sometimes facts are disputed. There are competing interpretations. One part of the scientific community says the stuff is dangerous, and the other say it isn't dangerous. And if you go more into details, you see that facts are like cows. That is citation that goes back to the British writer Dorothy Sayers, and he says, if you look them in the face hard enough, they generally run away. And that is the same situation sometimes with data, with so-called hard facts in science. So, you know, if you look at science, so things are much more complicated than 1 and 2 is 3. You have to think about prerequisites, you have assumptions, you have estimates, you have uncertainties, you have high complexity. So that makes things not so easy and makes things not so, let's say, hard, like hard facts. So that means science does not always guarantee conclusive evidence. And that is the issue, of course. So let me go more into details now and give you some examples of science communication and what we can learn from them. And I would like to start with, let's say, overview in terms of what are the two parallels to science communication. You see they are on both sides, on the sender side, on the receiver side too. And on the sender side, I would say, I don't go into details of bad science, of so-called junk science. I would say I go more in what is called politicization of science, and that means to be selective, to be dogmatic, or to switch into the moralization of the issue. And on the other side, you have poor resonance. That means people are rather not interested in science, or they defend the reception of scientific facts due to knowledge deficits, to biased beliefs, or just to their tendency to deny scientific results. So that is very short, and I would go into 4 examples. Science denial, what I call shift to morality, is number 2. Then number 3 is what I call hazard absolutism, and then last one is risk number twisters. So let's go to science denial. And I would like to start with a small example from a survey, which is, or from a survey question, which was very often used by the Allensbach Institute, which is one of the leading survey company in Germany. And they gave their, let's say, respondents, the people they asked in the surveys, the following small story. They say, imagine a scientist explains that studies prove that genetically modified food poses no danger to humans. But suddenly, an audience member to whom the scientist is talking, this person jumps up and shouts into the hall, "What do I care about numbers and statistics? Genetically modified food simply scares me." And then the respondents of the survey were asked so with whom they agree. And I guess it is no surprise that about 57% of the respondents in this questionnaire say they agree with the heckler. And only 19 disagree, and the rest is undecided. So a majority is, in a way, comfortable with this no science. I'm not interested, I'm just scared. So the shift to morality is a shift, I would say, from, this is my second example, from numbers to moral. And that means, you see, science usually, or that is the core of science, presents evidence in numerical data. That is the core business of science, I would say. Moral, on the other side, is the moral rules are usually illustrated by narratives. That means by stories, by qualitative data. And the shift to morality means the substitution of scientific evidence by moral considerations. And I would look at this, and I give you some examples. So, for instance, if you can hear in controversies about, let's say, the 5G issues in Italy or in Germany a couple of months ago, you could hear that if there are some data represented, that one of the saying would be from the opponents, no, we don't care about the study, this is bought by industry. Or on the other side, if you look now into Corona age, and about the possible vaccination. So some people say vaccination is profit-driven. That is only the idea of making profit. Or you have voices, or you have the sayings that voices of critical scientists are suppressed in the 5G risk assessment, or that on the other side, Corona deniers should not be given a public platform in TV. So that are the examples of this kind of moral argumentation. And you see that is very, very straightforward, and there's no much room for debate. and no much room for compromise. So that means morality, if you shift to morality, then you reduce complexity. And the issue is, but what else happens? And I would like to give you an idea of what it happens and why people very often in strong, let's say, controversies switch to morality and to moral arguments. And I would do that by a little study that was done, as you see, in 2007. And the study aim was to analyze who donates more money. And you had two groups. And one group got statistical information about the misery in Africa. I gave you just a short idea here what they gave to the respondents in this study. That was one group. And the other group got narrative information, and it was a description of a little girl, 7 years old, from Mali, and she is very, very poor and faces threats of severe hunger or starvation, and your life could be changed for better as a result when you give a gift, a financial gift. So statistical information on the one side, science-based more or less, and narrative, qualitative information, which in a way appells on your moral duties on the other side. And quite interesting is, if you look at the donations, that if you describe an identifiable victim, so you give the narrative, then you have a higher, clear higher donations from the people in this group. And even if you give both the identifiable, the victim information, this little story, and the statistics, you see that is less effective. So if you focus on the qualitative information, on the single case, or what we would call anecdotal evidence, then people are more impressed, and they are more willing to give donations. That means the moral narratives, if you switch into a moral discourse, so always effective evaluations come into the game. And they have obviously a bigger impact on beliefs, on what people think, and about their willingness to, let's say, to donate, than statistical evidence. So you could say, what is the core of that? That means narratives beat scientific evidence. And that is, let's say, a wisdom which is very old. And you see, I cite Joseph Stalin, the Soviet dictator, and he said, or he should have, some people say he had said this, and that is a saying as follows: the death of a man, of one man, is a tragedy. The death of millions is a statistic, nothing more. I'm coming to the next example on that, what I called hazard absolutism. And the key issue here is, let's say, an issue which is about 4 years ago, and an NGO made an analysis about how much glyphosate is in beers, and glyphosate is a pesticide, which is probably carcinogen. So, and that was in a way that they looked into the, that the Germans are beer drinker nations, and to Wursteinpils and to Hasselröder and to the Radeberger, and they found, you see, that is the last war here. They found that there is indeed glyphosate inside these in the beer, and you see the highest amount is in the Hasselröder pills, and that is about 30 microgram per liter. And they argued that the limit value for pesticides in tap water is 0.1 microgram per liter. If you compare that, everybody gets scared. and said, well, that is awful. So what are they doing? What are these companies doing? And why is the state not limiting this kind of poisoning our people? But if you look at a simple calculation, and the question is, how many beers have to be drunken for an elevated cancer risk due to glyphosate? And you see what I presented is about 30 microgram glyphosate in a liter beer Hasselwerder. And if you look at the limit value, in this case, what is limit value, which is called acceptable daily intake, ADI, and you have to know that this value, limit value, is calculated for a period of 7 years. So it is, if you look at this, and you see it is calculated in micrograms, not micrograms, per kilogram body weight per day for over 70 years. And you see that this ADE, this acceptable daily intake, is 500 microgram per kilogram body weight per day over 70 years. And if you look at this and say, okay, I multiply the value, the ADA value of 500 with the 60, which is the average body weight of people. So I come to 30,000 microgram per person. And then you say, well, what does it mean? And you see there's in 1 liter 30 microgram, and to reach 30,000 microgram, you have to drink 1,000 liters beer, or pills in this case, per day. That means you have to drink many years, exactly 70 years, more than 1,000 liter beers per day to come under risk. That is the answer of science. And you could, in a way, have a shortcut in this case, and that is what I call one more tiny thing. So everybody knows that beer contains alcohol, and alcohol is not probably carcinogenic, it is carcinogenic, and therefore nobody should have worries about a potential carcinogenic substance like glyphosate in beer, which is carcinogenic. That, therefore. So what counts? What counts is that these guys who, in a way, triggered the health scare with respect to glyphosate focus only on the existence of an hazard. Say, this is dangerous. There is something dangerous in your beer. That is a carcinogenic substance. And that creates biased risk perception. And for a meaningful communication, it is crucial to indicate how one is exposed to the hazard, because risk is hazard plus exposure. To see that on the little pictures here, I mean, a hazard is if you are on the land side and you see in the sea, in the ocean, a shark. I mean, the shark is dangerous, of course. You are far away, so that is nothing which, in a way, poses a risk to you. But if you are swimming and the shark is close to you, of course, then you are exposed to it, and then it is a risk. Next idea, next problem. That is what I call reporting bias, which is, in a way, not my expression. That is a standard expression for epidemiologists and people who look into problems of epidemiology, of meta-analysis. So, and this issue here is what I focus, that's what is called outcome reporting bias, and that means you report your scientific findings from your studies selectively. So you pick out one cherry-picking approach, which suits to your intentions and what you like to have, and then you focus on that, and all other things you ignore. You don't report these data to the public. That is sad to say, obviously not very seldom. It occurs frequently, and even in publications with the journals of high quality who publish high quality studies. So that's an issue which has to be taken. What we did was a little experiment, and we worked with the IARC. The IARC stands for the International Agency for Research on Cancer, and they released a press, or they had a press release in 2011 on RF-EMF and the potential hazards of RF-EMF exposure. And you see that one of the issue was, and that was in the you see I have only here the first paragraph and the results section. And the results section to say, well, in the highest category of heavy users, it means heavy users of cell phones. Now, you had an increase of, or an increased risk of 40%, or the 40% increased risk for gliomas, which is a kind of brain tumor. And that is the issue. And if you look at the data on from which these numbers come, that is the famous interphone study on brain tumors. And you see this little graph here, and you see that it is you have these red dots here and the red lines, and that means that the dots are the estimates of the odds ratio. The odds ratio is a measure of the risk. If the odds ratio is above 1, the risk is elevated. If the odds ratio is below 1, though there is a protective effect, the risk is lower than in the comparison group. And you compare the no users or low users of cell phones with users who use the cell phone more often. And the indication which were used here in these calculations was the so-called cumulative call time in minutes. That means how many minutes did these people call over their use of cell phones. When you see that only in the highest category, for people with 1,640 minutes using a cell phone, the risk is elevated, and that means this is the 40%. For all the others, the risk is more or less clearly lower, and it is a non-significant lower risk. So that's the entire message. What we did was we looked, so what is the effect on risk on risk perception if you just select the outcome of the highest user group on the right side, and if you compare that with a group who gets the entire information about, well, the situation in the other user groups. So that was the idea. You see that we compared the selective reported elevated risk with that what was not reported by IAC in the press release. We did that in a little study that is just explain it very, very briefly. There are the 2 treatment groups. One got the selective information, the other group got all the data, this kind of graphic here, and then we checked their risk perception with respect to the heavy mobile phone usage, the cell phone usage. For other users, the risk perception for EMF in general, and etc. And just to give you a spotlight of the results, so you see that is still under review, but we mastered we coped with the first round. That is that people who got only selective information, and by have a higher risk perception with respect to these focus groups, the heavy mobile phone user group, but also with respect to the other groups, and also with respect to the EMF perception in general, risk perception in general. So that is the idea. That means that this kind of selective outcome reporting is a common problem in science, and this bias leads to distorted perceptions, and that means researchers should avoid this bias, especially in their public summaries on their press releases, because sometimes there is the tendency to give this kind of summaries, because it's not a scientific paper, it's just a summary or press release, kind of spin, which in a way focus on the let's say outcomes you like most. Last issue, number twisters. Number twisters is something which I call this is the use of risk descriptions that give you a biased picture of the risk. And I would like to start with an issue which is was debated a couple of years ago, and it's about breast cancer screening for women over 50. And one of the message, at least in Germany, which is communicated by people who in a way would like to motivate the women to go to this kind of screening program, is that there's a 1 out of 10 women is affected by breast cancer during her lifetime. 1 out of 10 women, 1 in 10 women. So the question is that an good science communication? And we have to look at the detail. You look that the lifetime risk is 1 out of 10. But if you say, well, and if you look closer and say, what does it mean? And that means that the lifetime risk is a risk for a female newborn over her entire period of life. That means from from birth to death, or in this case, to being 79. So, but if you go and say, well, babies don't go to breast cancer screenings, that is an absurd idea. That is something which is for women who are 55 years and older. And if you look at this group of women, then you see its remaining lifetime risk is 1 out of 70. And if you look at the, let's say, next 5 years on the risk, so the probability to get breast cancer in the next 5 years for a 45-year-old woman is 1 in 100, and for the next year is 1 in 500. So that means these kind of risks are quite different and depend on the age of the woman, and the lifetime risk is not a good indicator to tell 55 or older women what are their chances to catch breast cancer. That means the aim of science communication is information and education, not persuasion, and to give an unbiased description of our findings, or of the scientific findings, that then we should have a description without any spin, without any tendency to push your audience, your receivers of your message in a certain kind of direction. So that means for the people on the side of on the receiver side, be aware of potential spins by asking whether the reported issue fits your personal conditions or not. So far to my examples of what we can learn from, let's say, distorted science communication. And I would like to have, instead of in summary, just for the reason of to connect it a little bit to a very, let's say, present risk issue in our times now, to the COVID-19 communication. And you could say you could find the same issues I reported just before to you. I explained it to you a little bit. The science denial, you have a shift to morality, you have sometimes hazard absolutism, and you have, of course, risk number twisters. And that is the most important issue. And I would like to get a little bit into detail of this issue. So I start with a headline, which I found on December 16 in Die Welt, which is one of the leading newspapers. And the headline was "More deaths through COVID-19 than from cancer." And so what they did, but they didn't say it, is that they looked at the COVID-19 fatalities for one day, for one single day. And with respect to cancer, they took the average number of one day. That means the day average. And that is, of course, a kind of, let's say, biased procedure, because if you look over the entire year, and you could say, well, we are now in December 16, so the year is more or less over, and we have in Germany, with respect to the COVID-19 mortality, 23,770 dead fatalities. So, and with respect to cancer mortality for 2019, we have 301,000 cases. That means that is much more, and this is quite the reverse of that was what was focused here in this kind of headline in Die Welt, the German newspaper. Last example is, what could be a more, let's say, sophisticated approach here? And the more sophisticated approach would be that you say, well, we look at the mortality with respect to COVID-19 now over the last, or we look at the mortality in Germany over the years 2016 to 2020, and 2020, you know, so it was also COVID-19. And there are two lines which are interesting for us. When you look, that is the age group of 35 to 59, the blue and the red line. The red line is with COVID, and the blue line is without COVID in 22. When you see, if you look at the two curves, at the two lines, that there is in both cases in this age group a slight under mortality in this age group. But if you look at the age group 80 plus, then you see, and you look on the piece on the right side of the graph, you see that it is a bit elevated, and that would be have a focus on this age group. And this is a little bit similar, but less, let's say, pregnant, less clear for the age group about in the 70s, my age group. So that is the message. So the message is look at the data, make a clear differentiation, look not only at the average, because we have the flaws of the average, and if you look in a differentiated way, you see what are needed. What kind of protection is needed for which groups? So that means it is a plaidoyer for and focused protection with respect to COVID-19. That means we need reliable data, we need useful comparison, and we need data that offer differentiated conclusions. And the issue we have, and that I would like to, in a way, to underline, that was, in a way, mentioned by Roger Pielke, a scientist from the US, coming from Colorado, and he is, in a way, enriching the debate by, let's say, citing the American philosopher John Dewey. And this guy emphasized the importance of what he called intellectual hospitality. And by this, he meant an attitude of mind which is actively welcomes suggestions on relevant information from all sides. It is not only a kind of, let's say, tunnel look, to look only on things what you like and what confirms your view. Be open. And the other thing is we have to, in this kind of, let's say, scientific hospitality, to look at other sides too, not only on your side. I have to say, what counts is, well, Jürgen Habermas is a German philosopher, one of the most important under the living philosophers. He said, what should count is the unforced force of a good argument. That means we should look at the scientific argument, we should look at the evidence. That is his saying. That means in terms of our role as scientists, we have to be, when we talk to the public, when we talk to politics, we have to be honest brokers. That means science is based on probability. That is for sure. And that means that we should be transparent. We should clear in what are the findings and what are the conclusions, the implications of our findings, which make a clear line between both. Or we should have a balanced interpretation and summaries. Not only that we give things a little spin, which in a way convinces people, which persuades people in the sense we like to have them. That would be good science communication. And now I'm coming to the end, and I say thank you very much for your attention for this presentation from me from the remote Germany. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Really an outstanding presentation, as to my opinion, and I'm sure also to opinions of the audience. Really, thank you. I have a lot of comment and question. Let me start with a comment, waiting for some question from the audience. Let's start with a comment, at least with a story, because I personally try to use the example, the comparison between electromagnetic field classification in the cancerogenic scale with alcohol many times in public debates, with in schools, in municipalities. But it is very difficult to find a positive answer from the audience, about positive thinking from the audience. My explanation was that in the communication of science, and this is my first question to you, at least asking your opinion, is also important taking into account the way of thinking of the audience. In other words, my explanation of the fact that, at least in Italy, it's difficult to compare alcohol and the electromagnetic field of other agents is that population is the use of alcohol in the daily living of a population, wine, for example, or beers, are an habit. So they are not considering a risk and they are not used to put to consider the possibility that it is a risk. Wine is a typical beverage in the lunch and dinner of Italian population. And so I think that also could be important for the communication of science, also taking into account the habits, let me say, or in any case, the use of the audience. What do you think about?
Yeah, you touched several very important issues in your talking now. I would like to start with the first one. Of course, if you are in a meeting with, let's say, a concerned public, and if they have, let's say, an idea that this what is planned in their vicinity, let's say, high voltage power line or something like that, no? They don't like it. So the first issue is that they don't like it, and the arguments are not very important. So if you say, well, the argument why you don't like it is there is no scientific evidence for that, to say, well, I don't care, but I don't like it. So judgment is first, or opinion is first, and the attitude is first, and thinking is second. So you have then to do with some conflict of interests, and then science is sometimes not the right issue to solve that issue. So, but let me say, that is especially problematic if you deal with a hostile audience. No? So audience is in a way aggressive and this kind of issue. So then, of course, this kind of comparison, if you compare, let's say, RF-EMF exposure with, let's say, drinking wine or beer or something like that, other with people, with risk people accept. So then that is dangerous. What I would say here is that you could work with what is called the majority, or the scientific, the opinion of the scientific majority. You say, of course, there are some people who say there could be a risk. You could say, but if you look at the scientific community or the whole, no, they would say there is a broad consensus of people who care about science, of people who are good scientists, that they're under the given circumstances and if you, in a way, comply with the value limits, then that you don't have to worry about your health. So the issue is, there is some evidence for that from psychology, that working with the scientific consent, you can, in a way, trying to, in a way, at least bring your opponents in the defensive.
Thank you very much. I fully agree with you. Now, a question from Serena Fiocchi.
Hi, Peter. Thank you very much for your nice presentation. I have a question again about EMF exposure. I work with Paolo on EMF exposure assessment, and in particular about 5G risk perception. What we feel here in Italy about the people risk perception of 5G exposure seems to be stronger, overrated, and more widespread than the risk perception of previous technologies. In your opinion, why that happens, and which is the main weakness in communication strategies among the one you cited that we need to focus on?
Well, I mean, that is a very interesting and also a very big question in terms of giving a correct answer. I mean, I see the situation. I, in a way, did some couple of years ago some interviews with NGOs who were in opposition to high voltage power lines, and the issue is quite clear. What they have is a kind of concern, which is in a way triggered by maybe there could be a possible risk. And then you go and meet people who have a similar thinking and go to the internet, and then your selective information processing starts. You look only for the information which supports your opinion. And other people next to you, whom you work together, whom you build a group, a pressure group, are in the same mood, in the same belief, share the same beliefs. And then you have this kind of collective, let's say, amplification of risk perception. And at the end, you, in a way, only see what you like. So all the arguments you bring in are seen as arguments brought in by people who are on the wrong side. So it starts to become not longer a scientific issue, a scientific debate. It's a kind of moral debate now. And the good people on the one side, that are the people who think they are on the right side, and you. And then it comes to a crash. And that, in a way, is very difficult to handle. The issue is, first of all, I would say, to have a kind of dialogue and a kind of setting for this dialogue, which, in a way, makes it less possible, this kind of, let's say, we against them. So let's say if you sit in front of 500 people and you try to argument, that is in a kind of lost position. If you go and say, we have a good exhibition, and we go with this exhibition which explains how RF-EMF works, what are the scientific data that we have, what are maybe open questions, and you have different, let's say, posters, and you walk from poster to poster with a few people and always a small circle of people, then you can go and talk, and you have not this kind of hostile atmosphere of a big audience, we against you. That is one of the big issues you start on. And then I would say, of course, I mean, if you, and that is what you, I guess, do, is that you say, okay, it could be, there are some data, and if you, which in a way could give you the idea that there could be a risk. So we talk about risk potentials. So we are in something where uncertainties prevail. And this means, and then it is always to say, how could I? And you can't go into the details let's say, of each study and to say what are the good, what is poor science, what is bad science. The issue would be to say, well, go and talk about what is the scientific consensus. What are the most important, let's say, scientific committees who are behind you? And that is a way to do that, because that is an argument people, in a way, at least value. I mean, there is, of course, not a magic solution, no magic bullet in terms of that you turn the table, but at least, in a way, you make clear that you have a position, that this position is shared by the scientific community. That would
Thank you very much.
No other questions?
Yeah. So I think that I can make a. Okay. Thank you, Paolo. You are muted. So, okay, Peter. Thank you very much for your nice presentation. I have a quick question.
Okay.
When you have a communication, as you said, you have a transmitted side and a received side. What do you think? Because you can work very well to transmit a message, but if the receiver doesn't work, it is very difficult to have the proper message. What do you think about the possibility to have some kind of formation or education for the receiver? I mean, in terms of school education, school formation, to form people to receive properly, because you can communicate well from a scientific point of view, but if the receiver is not if not properly formed, probably you are not able to send the proper message. Thank you very much.
Well, this is very, very interesting, and I would say also a very challenging question. If you move away, let's say, from RF-EMF, when you go, let's say, to COVID-19, well, you see that the strategies in COVID-19 to, let's say, deal with opponents who say that is not a big risk. There's no need for a lockdown or something like that. When you see these people are in the general public, in the general media, at least in Germany, approached in a different way. They say, well, if you don't believe in science, so we don't discuss with you. It's a more, let's say, straightforward idea. I'm not totally behind it. But what I would say is, if you, in a way, trying to educate people who are in opposition to you about a risk issue, and the key issue is that education doesn't help in the way you plan the education. That means by informing, educating the people. What you have to do first is to establish a working relationship. That means to establish a relationship which makes clear you are a human too. You are a person who, in a way, is considering the issues which are brought in by, let's say, concerned people, without, in a way, to be or to get, in a way, overwhelmed by that, and them say, well, I share your view, or I think I see you are concerned, and concern is something I take it seriously. No, what I would say is a good relationship, but stand for what science says, what science is, and come on with a clear-cut message like, well, that is what science says, and it's not only my personal opinion. And of course, there are some people who say something else. But if you look at the real scientific data and at the big scientific organizations, they share the view with me. And I know you can behave, or you can believe what you like to believe, but this is the truth. It doesn't mean that you can convince them. That is, of course, the case. But you, in a way, have to be clear in your opinion. But in a way, you should also see or indicate, show, or disclose would be the right word, the empathy with the human beings on the other side.
Thank you very much.
and I don't know if I can
sorry, I was mute my mic. A question from Matteo Drago.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, thank you, Peter, for your presentation. It was really interesting. And my question is more related to, let's say, the problem of policymakers, because as we know, policymakers thrives on cognitive bias from the population, so they always try to let's say get the approval from the population. And from the scientific point of view, and most importantly, both from the point of view of 5G and from the point of view of COVID-19, how could we, let's say, guide the policymakers to the right decision if there are many people that believes things in a certain way, and thus they lead policymakers to certain decisions? I don't know if I'm clear, but if it was clear in my question, but
yeah, I guess I have an idea of what the question is and what the issue is behind. Of course, I mean, you look at the interaction between science on the one side and politics on the other side. And the issue is, how should scientists approach politics in terms of to give them advice. And what I said is, let's say, let me start with another remark. There are two perils. The one is, of course, that you, in a way, don't raise your voice. You know that, let's say, that politics needs advice, and you have the data, you have scientific evidence, and then if you don't raise your voice, so that is a lost opportunity, and it's also something which could have bad consequences. So, in terms of the decisions politicians could make. So the other side is, of course, what I call dogmatism, that in a way you have the idea that here's science, and science is right, and science knows everything, and then there is only one way, so there's only one truth, and there's no alternatives. And that is, I would say, also very dangerous, and that was the reason why I said at the end of my talk that this kind of, let's say, hospitality, but hospitality by rules, you could say, well, what we need is a scientific discourse, also with people who have a different view. So, for instance, in Germany, maybe the situation is similar in Italy. The question of let's say, the lockdown and the side effects of the lockdown. I mean, lockdown, of course, is something which reduces contacts. And if the contact between people is reduced, then, of course, the infection rate should go down. But on the other side, you could say, well, but what is the bad side of restricting contacts? What are the implications for the society in large in the upcoming years? And there's not only a question between health on the one side and economy, prosperity on the other side of the society, but it's a kind of risk issue you should take into account. And this kind of discussion where we open up our view, we don't look as scientists only, let's say, on one issue, which is our professional issue, but we have a larger view, and the task of the politicians would be to organize a kind of scientific dialogue, which in a way allows to raise different voices, especially from different disciplines, and to get an more detailed picture of the potential consequences of the decisions they have to make. That is what I would say is the most important issue. That is, of course, an ideal situation, because even, or especially politicians, are nervous in this situation to make failures. And if you make failures, you can get blamed. So the idea, which sometimes in a way guides politicians, is to avoid blame. That means if you are not blamed, you are good politicians, and you will maybe have a good starting point for the next election. But if blame is attributed to you and you come into a debate and somebody can say, well, he in a way risked the death of many, many people, then that is a kind of no-go. And then you are in a very bad position. Then you need, in a way, a kind of courage. You need balls to stay behind what you say. And that is, I guess, necessary as a scientist, to stay by your opinion when the opinion is very, very, when the opinion is evidence-based, but also to say, well, I'm certainly ready to talk to people with other voice, but according to scientific rules.
Okay, I guess you answered really. It was a wonderful question. Thank you very much. Answer, not question. Sorry.
Thank you for your attention, for your questions.
Thank you very much to Peter and to all the audience. Let me just add a last comment to the question of Lucanus about the fact that probably, for sure, we have not to educate the audience, but for sure we have to educate scientists. And I think is a crucial point that from the starting of the scientific activities of our young researchers should be educated and training on communicate science, because it is something that one can learn, and not just an appendix of the scientific communication. That is another thing, to my opinion. Thank you very much, Peter, to stay with us this afternoon, this evening, and thank you to all the audience. And hoping for the next now, just to provide an information for the audience. The next Thursday is December 24, so we will meet together in the new year in 2021. So let me give my greetings to Peter and to you all for a wonderful Christmas and a Happy New Year, just because we are coming to the end of the year. And thank you very much.
Yeah, the same to you and all who were in the audience. So it was a nice opportunity. The only thing I regret is that we couldn't have a face-to-face interaction, because now it would be time for small talk and a little glass of wine. So,
absolutely, and a good dinner, Peter, and a good dinner.
The rest of the day, and bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye, and thank you to Peter and to you all. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.